Hi, and welcome back to the channel of ExoplanetStudios. For new viewers, on this channel I'm documenting the process of making a low-poly survival game that's currently just called The Island. In the time since the last devlog I wasn't able to make as much progress as I'd liked, but I still have some interesting new things to show you, like for example a system for sailing. So let's get right into it. Starting with the new ocean generation. Lately, I've been playing a lot of Sea of Thieves and Raft, and while playing these games I realized one thing. I really like ships. The feeling of sailing your own boat from island to island is just incredibly satisfying. In my game there were always going to be oceans and rivers to navigate, so I always had planned to have some kind of ship travel in-game, but I decided to make it a bit more complex than it is in many games of the genre. Maybe not Sea of Thieves like complex, but I at least wanted to have some kind of wind and sailing system. But before I could start with the implementation I needed to make sure that there's a reason to sail. Up until now the placement of the biomes was pretty much completely random, with only a probability value determining what biome spawns where. I then forced the biomes at the outer rim of the map to be oceans, which means that I would basically end up with one big island instead of many small ones. To fix that, I used a layer of Voronoi noise, also known as cellular noise, where I calculate the distance to the borders, which gives me a height value so I can make sure that there are oceans at the borders of the cells, mountains in the center and forests in between. Additionally, there's a difficulty value to allow more difficult biomes to generate further away from the spawn. Once all that was done, I got to work on ships. The first step to creating physics-based ships is an implementation for buoyancy. Luckily, I'm not the first one with this idea, so there's a very simple way to do this. Basically, I create a bunch of floater objects around the ships and then just apply an upwards force to their position, depending on how deep they are below the water level. By recreating the wave functions from the shader in C#, you can also make the floater react to different wave heights and speeds. I then modeled a raft in Blender, since it will be the first boat you can sail within the story. There are currently two forces moving the raft: the waves, which are constantly pushing it in a random direction, and the wind. The wind has a much stronger impact on the raft and pushes it forward. The speed depends on the angle between the wind and the sail. When the wind comes from the front, you can even get pushed backwards. Also, the direction of the wind and current changes every couple of minutes. To rotate the raft, there's a steering pedal at the back, which you can interact with to change the direction you are heading. The turning speed depends on the current speed of the raft. A big problem I got when implementing this into the game was that I had to make the player actually stay on the raft and still be able to move normally, even if the raft was turning and moving. The way I solved this is when you get on the raft, the player rigid body gets disabled and instead a dummy player rigid body is spawned on a dummy raft collider, which remains stationary. The player movement script then only moves the player dummy and another script synchronizes the real player with the movement of the dummy. I believe the system is used by most games where the player has to stay on moving objects, and in my testing it has proven to be really robust. But after I was done with these changes, there were some things from the last devlog I wasn't really happy with. One of the things I showed off in the last devlog was the harvesting system. Back then my idea was to have the tool actually collide with the harvested object, but when I implemented this I realized that the arm of the player is physically not long enough to achieve that at normal distances, which is why you had to get really close to the trees. This was especially a problem with trunks and smaller objects on the ground. That's why I decided to go back to a simple animation system, like there's in most first-person games, where the movement of the tool is just indicated and does not affect the actual gameplay. To be clear, it's still possible to base the harvesting on actual collision if you don't rotate and move the arm with the camera, the most famous example for this being the forest, but I personally like to see my hand all the time, so this works better for me. As part of this I remade the first person character model to create real hands as opposed to whatever that is. Luckily I'm a professional, so making these hands totally didn't take 2 days. I also tweaked the rigid body parameters to make the trunk of the trees behave more like actual trunks. Then I finished up my menu rework by adding a pause menu in the style of the main menu and creating a settings manager to take care of setting creation, saving and loading. To add new settings, I now just need to add a method attribute to the function that should get called when the setting is changed, and the UI objects will get generated automatically. And to complete this list, I added the possibility to make map objects not spawn near global objects, and to flatten the terrain around said global objects, which will make them way more useful in the future. I then moved on to creating a real start for the game. Up until now, when starting a new game in the island, you would get spawned really high up in the air at the border of the map, but now that I had the raft in place, I was able to create a better start for the game. Basically, when you start a new game, you will now always spawn on a predefined spawn island in the middle of the map, where you will be introduced to the story and the game itself. This process is broadly known as a tutorial. I took some time to outline how this could look like, but as more mechanics get added into the game, I will maybe adjust the spawn island to show them off. Basically, right now you are stranded on this island after a ship crash, and you need to repair a raft to get away from it. To repair the raft, you will need 5 wood for the mast, 3 ropes and some cloth for the sail. The ropes can be harvested from a bigger tree, the cloth and the axe for the wood can be found at a campsite at the top of the island. After repairing the raft, you will get to sail away from the island and arrive in the randomly generated part. As you might have noticed, for this devlog I try to go a bit more in depth into how I'm doing things, so that you can maybe learn a little bit from what I'm doing. Let me know in the comments if you found it interesting. Also, since the last devlog we broke the 1000 subs mark, which after only 2 videos is pretty insane. So thanks to everyone who subscribed to this channel. Now the only thing left to say is like if you liked, dislike if you didn't, subscribe, join my Discord link in the description, and I'll see you in the next one.